It's ribbon based as opposed to being not ribbon based. So it looks a lot like other more modern software packages like, Word or PowerPoint or something. So everything's organized into ribbons. I find in ArcMap Pro, things tend to find you more than you have to go search and, submenus and stuff. So I've liked that a lot. It's a lot less searching and a lot more things popping up in a pane or in a tab or something. ArcGIS, Arc Pro is really integrated with Arc Portal and Arc Online. So for example, if you're logged into Arc Online on your machine, you can access your online content. You can publish out to Arc Online if you have those rights. If you're connected to a group or an organization, you can grab layers from your organization and stream them in. In contrast, ArcMap's not really tied well with Arc Online or Arc Portal. Instead, it was really set up to interact with Arc Portal. Okay. Arc Server, which is kind of less integration with Arc Pro. And again, this is online content, or your online content is integrated or easy to access. This is kind of stupid, but I like dark themes. So one thing I really like about Pro is you have a couple theme options now. So you have a light theme and a dark theme instead of just your default theme that you don't have any other options, which I like. So anyway, that's kind of a side-by-side comparison. One other thing that's changed a lot is how we store our files or our projects. So with ArcMap, we worked with Mxd files. Those were your map document files that link to your data and your maps and layouts. There effectively is no map or Mxd files now for Pro. They've switched to a different format, and those are project files or .aprx files. So those serve this same purpose as Mxd files served in ArcMap. But again, they allow for multiple maps, multiple scenes, multiple layouts. Yeah. So one thing that is nice is if you have a lot of old Mxd files and you'd like to bring those projects or maps into Arc Pro, there are tools for doing imports, which I'll show you. It's not like dead. If you want to go back to your Mxds, you can import those in and create project files. Whenever you create a new project in Pro, it is going to generate a default toolbox and a default geodatabase to write things into. So it kind of creates this like workspace. So it's not just an APRX file; it's kind of a workspace that it generates. Okay, so I'm going to pop over to Pro real quick. So just pulling this over here. So I have a project file pulled up here. And as you can see, I have multiple maps. I don't have any layouts yet. We'll make some at some point. But again, you can have multiple maps. They can all have different projections, different data layers. Doesn't really matter. So you can see I got a series of maps there. So let's say we wanted to create a new project from scratch. So I'm just going to go over here to the project tab, hit save, just in case I made changes to that. And then we're going to do a new, and in Arc Pro, there's a series of like kind of default templates. So if you do a map template, it's going to auto generate a map layout with a base map. Catalog is not going to generate a map, but it will open up with the catalog pane. And then scene and local, obviously those are creating scenes. So I'm just going to create one with a map template. And I'm just going to go to a location on my machine to save that to. Let me see here. I'm going to make a new folder. And we'll call this Pro Examples. And hit OK. And then I'll name this AGP Workshop. Okay. I think I already did that, but all right. So anyway, this just created a new project using a map template. So as you see, it opens up. I have one map. and that's it. So let's see what that actually created on my disk. So if I navigate to that location on my machine, so this was pro examples. So this is what it created. So you can see we have the APRX file. Again, that basically replaces the Mxd file. We've got this folder, which is a dot with this .gdb extension. So that's a file geodatabase. So it generates that as like your default location, excuse me, to store things. And then we have this TBX file, which is the toolbox. So in short, when you create a project, it's going to create an APRX file, which is like your Mxd, but it's also going to generate a file geodatabase, and it's going to generate a toolbox. And those will be your default places that you save tools or Python scripts or files. You don't have to save stuff there, but that's just kind of set up as the default. So for example, if I go to this map, I click add data, and then I go to databases here, it automatically has a connection to that geodatabase that it created to go along with the project. Okay, bounce back to this. All right, so that's the Mxd files. Again, you can import Mxd files. Unfortunately, I was going to do this, but I realized since I don't have any Mxd files on this machine because I don't have Arc Desktop on it. But it's actually pretty easy to do. It's especially easy if you have all your like relative paths set up and whatnot in your Mxd file. So you basically can run an import tool, and then it should import the maps, layouts, or whatever that are in that Mxd, and you can save it as part of your project file. You can also import files from ArcScene if you want. So that's how they're kind of dealing with the transition of your projects. To do that, again, I really can't work through this because I don't have one, but you go to this Insert tab, and then you can go to Import Map, and that allows you to import maps from, so you can see here, ArcMap, so MXDs, ArcGlobe, ArcScene. Yeah, so anyway, that's how you kind of pull stuff in, and then you just navigate, find it, and it should read it in. If it doesn't connect to the layers correctly, that's generally because there's an issue with relative paths or something got moved, but you can like reconnect to layers if you know where they're at. So anyway, that's probably useful if you have a lot of old projects and you'd like to kind of migrate them into Pro. So there are options to import stuff in. Okay, so that's that. Let's talk a little bit about licensing. This is just kind of all background stuff without actually working with any data, just dealing with the software in general. So with ArcMap, there were generally two licensing options. So you could license through some type of license manager, like that's on the server, or you could have some standalone single license, like a licensing key. And there was the license managing software that shipped with Arc Desktop that you could go in and connect to different licenses, activate or deactivate extensions, and so on and so forth. In the licensing for Pro is effectively just integrated into Pro. So I'll show you this in a minute, but if you underneath the project tab, there's a licensing area, and you can go in there and change the licensing. So there's no like standalone licensing admin. There's a couple different ways that you can license Pro. They're a little bit different from the Arc Desktop. So single-use license is where you have a standalone file or key. At WV, we don't tend to use those very much. So we don't give standalone licenses on campus generally because they can hit our server. I guess if you had a computer that was like in the field, you may want to do that, but it seems like that's not used as often now in Pro as it was in Arc Desktop. A concurrent use license is pretty similar to ArcMap or Arc Desktop. So in that case, you have a license manager on a server, and computers that have access to that server, they can hit that license that way. So for example, in our department at WVU, we have a license manager on one of our servers, and like all the computers in our computer lab that have access to that server can grab the license from there. So that's that's your kind of typical server-based license manager. The name user license is something that I never really ran into in ArcMap, and I'm not sure if there is an equivalent. But the idea here is that you have like a user account, and that user account has certain rights associated with it. So so for example, you can give somebody access to Pro or certain extensions. So generally, there's a couple different ways to do this. One is to use like Arc Portal or Arc Enterprise. We don't do that at WVU. What we originally do is use ArcGIS Online. So at WVU, we have a ArcGIS Online organizational account, and we can basically create accounts that are tied to our organization, and then we have rights to administer accounts via the WVU license. For example, for example, if we have a set of like a class start in the fall, we can assign we can give all the students in that class an ArcGIS Online account. We can give them certain rights on Arc Online and give them access to Pro and certain extensions. And then whenever they go into Pro, they effectively just have to log into their account, and that's how their licensing works. So let me just move back to Pro here just to show you a few things. So you can see I'm logged into my account. So up here in the corner it says my name and then Western University in the parentheses there. So what that indicates is that I'm signed into this account, and it's tied to the WVU organization. So I could sign out. I could sign into a different account. If I had a server like license, I could sign out of this and use it instead. But I'm not gonna mess with that. Okay, so that's that. If you want to see like your licensing options, if you go to the project tab and then under licensing, this will show you what your licensing setup is. Okay, so I'll be honest, I don't completely understand all the different licensing levels. At WVU, we have advanced, so showing here that advanced is licensed, and our license expires basically in a year because it just rolled over. And then there's obviously, we don't license basic or standard. Here's all the license extensions that we have. And then if you want to manage it, you could go in here to configure your licensing options, and that allows you to turn on extensions if you have access to them, or turn them off, or change from a named user to a server or something like that. Again, the licensing is all just kind of integrated in Pro now. There are also different licenses for access to certain types of data. I don't really use that much at all, but that's kind of separate, as you see there. Just real quick, I was kind of show you. So anyway, this is Arc Online. I'm just on my content. I'm just going to go into our organization real quick and do members, and I'm just going to look for myself. I'm going to look for my grad student because mine's kind of different because I'm an admin. So here's my grad student's account. If I go in here to manage add-on licenses, then I could like turn on this student or this person's licensing, that their extensions that they can use, and I could even turn off their ArcGIS Online access if I wanted. It says included here because of the licensing level. Anyway, so that's the type of stuff you'll probably never really run into unless you are an admin for your organization. So at WVU, like we have a set of admin, I'm one of them. So I have like rights and I can see screens that other people can't. Yep. I also get to reset passwords all the time. So someone put in the chat that named user license is usually used in organizations that have a ArcGIS licensing server. So yeah, that's true. That's that's one way that it's used. Okay. Before we look at the data maps and scene stuff, I just want to do a quick kind of overview of where stuff is in Pro and how it's maybe different or unique from ArcMap. Okay. All right. So again, it's a tab-based software. So we have all these tabs that do different things. So if you go to the project tab, this is where you can open a project, create a new project, save changes, save a copy, manage your licensing, so on and so forth. Another thing, and this is kind of specific, but if you do work with ArcPy or Python, you can go to this Python tab. So this has to do a search, so it takes a second. And if you want to do any manipulation to your Python setup, you can do that there. So whenever you install Pro, it basically installs a default Python environment. And if you want to, say, create a new environment or add packages or a lot of Python libraries to an environment, you can like clone environments and switch out your default one. This is something you might have to do if you do anything like deep learning, because you have to install some packages. So you can see here I have this. So when I installed ArcGIS Pro, it installed this Python environment, ArcGIS Pro, Py3. And you can see here I can add packages, I can clone environments. So again, that's something you probably wouldn't get into unless you do a lot of Python, but that's how you would do that management. So that's what you get under the project tab. Under the map tab, that's a lot of your obviously map related stuff. So adding data layers, switching base maps, adding bookmarks, going to coordinates, searching for locations, making measurements. One thing that I do like in Pro is I think the locate tool's been improved a good bit. So just pick a location real quick. We'll do. So there's the search tools in here are pretty good, both lat long and then by using a geocoding service. One thing I always get kind of confused about in Pro, so since I'm logged into an ArcGIS Online account, then I have access to some services through that. So when I just ran that search, it used like a geocoding service that Esri provides. Some of those will charge credits if you have credits set up through your organization, and I'm not always clear what does and what doesn't charge against your credits. So that's the map tab. The insert tab is the insert stuff. So for example, you can add new maps. Again, you have multiple maps and layouts. So if I click on this, I can do new map and it'll create a new map there. You can add layouts. You can do reports. I'll be honest, I don't really use those. This new notebook, this is for Python. So let me see, you'll probably try to, it'll initialize. So if you're a user, if you use a lot of Python, if you use Python a good bit, a lot of people now work in like Jupyter Notebooks or Jupyter Lab, where it opens up like all these cells in a web browser, and then you can run your code cell by cell. Notebooks are effectively the same thing. It's just integrated into Pro. So this allows you to run Python code. So. There's some pretty high in Python. So anyway, that's what notebooks do. They're just they're basically like Jupyter Notebooks, if you're familiar with that. You can connect to or create toolboxes there. Again, we already talked about the import options, so migrating things from Arc Desktop. We'll look at connections later, but this allows you to connect to things like map services and whatnot, databases. There has been some integration with other types of databases. So for example, if you ever work with or use geo packages, you can use those now in Pro. I'm a big fan of those. And then you can connect to folders. That's basically all I use there. The analysis stuff we'll look at the end. One thing that hasn't changed a whole lot in Pro is the toolbox and the tools. They're all pretty similar setup, but there are some new stuff that was, obviously wasn't there before, which we will look at later. So things like raster functions, there's like deep learning stuff. So anyway, we'll look at that. Here you can connect tool. You can open. Here's where you open the toolbox pane. View is where you can go in and turn stuff on and off, like layouts and whatnot. So for example, if I got rid of the contents and geoprocessing pane, if I go to, I can turn those back on under view. So contents turns the content pane back on. This would open the Python window. If you see the Python cursor there, if you want to type Python, this opens up the toolbox, the geoprocessing toolbox, catalog view. Again, just similar to Arc, I guess it was Arc Desktop 10 point whatever, where they integrated in catalog. There effectively is no separate catalog at all now with Pro. It's just completely integrated in. If you want to use the catalog, there's kind of two views. So there is the catalog pane, which opens up a pane over here, like a smaller window. And then there's catalog view, which opens up a bigger view, like similar to how it opens up a map. I personally like the catalog views. I just think they're easier to use because you've got more space. So that's how catalog's been integrated in. If you have certain types of files open, you might get other tabs. So for example, there's an imagery tab here. You may not have that if you don't have Image Analyst installed, but this is some stuff that's specific to working with images. So things like image classification, band indices, so on and so forth. The share tab, but there's a lot of new stuff there. So this allows you to export stuff and package things up to send out. So just a couple quick notes here. This project, what new project package, what that does is it takes everything that's in your project, including the data layers, and basically creates this package file, which is like a compressed file that you could ship off to someone else. And then they could take that and uncompress it or open it up and then have all that info on their computer. And that's, again, all the map project file and all the associated data and everything. The map version is similar, except this allows you to just send out one map and its associated content as opposed to everything in the project. Then there's one for mobile maps. I'll be honest, I don't use that much, but this can generate a package that you can set up to be installed on a mobile device, like for field work. There's some options here for exporting things like deep learning models. Those are kind of specific, or geoprocessing tools if you've created a tool. I'll show you some of the features today under Share As that relate to the kind of web environment. So you can export out maps to web maps to ArcGIS Online, or just the data layers out. And then there's options for things, like exporting out maps and images and graphics and whatnot. So this is kind of a broad overview of the tabs. Okay. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to chime in or write in the chat there. Okay. So in this section, I wanted to just talk a little bit about working with data, maps, and scenes. Okay, so someone asked if you can embed hyperlinks into an exported map. I don't think so. You might be able to, in the specific case of something like a PDF, where it maintains the data, but something that's like a flat image file, like a JPEG or TIFF or something, probably wouldn't. Okay, so let's jump into looking at some data related stuff. So there's still an add data button. So we're all probably familiar with the add data button, but there are a lot of additional options underneath the add data button. So pretty similar to ArcMap, you can add data from a variety of different sources, and some of this will depend on how your system is set up and what rights you have and whatnot. So you can obviously add files from your local machine. You can connect to servers to stream in like map services or tiled services or feature services or whatever. You can connect to databases. If you're logged into ArcGIS Online, you can connect to your ArcGIS Online content and anything that's shared with you through your organization. You can connect to portals, like if you have a large portal at your workplace. And there are some other services. So for example, Esri has this living atlas of the world where they have a bunch of curated data layers that you can work with and stream in. Arc Pro supports file geodatabases. That's kind of its default single user, single editor database, and also enterprise geodatabases if you're connected to portal or server. There is currently no support of personal geodatabases. If you remember, or if you still use those, personal geodatabases are basically built on top of Microsoft Access files. They have a Microsoft Access extension. Those are no longer supported in Pro. I believe that I'm not even sure if there's an import tool. If you have Arc Desktop, the easiest thing to do is just use Catalog to convert your personal geodatabases into file geodatabases, and then they'll be active and be available in Pro. So in short, if you use personal geodatabases, that's effectively dead now in Pro. Okay, let's look at a few other things. Base maps are pretty similar. You have a series of the Esri base maps, and you can connect to other services and use them as base maps. If you create base maps and store them in Arc Online, you can use those, import those in. So we'll look at that and a few examples of that. Again, the Living Atlas is new. Well, yeah, it's new to Arc Pro, and it's just a bunch of curated data layers that Esri maintains that you can kind of stream in and use. Some of them you can download, some of them you can't. It just kind of depends on how they're set up. So a lot of feature services could be downloaded or exported locally, whereas like a tiled service can't be. So we'll look at some examples of that. You can connect to servers. This is a little bit different than how you did it in ArcMap. So I'll do an example of this. Yeah, and then we'll look at some data symbology stuff. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to my transition to Pro example. And I'm just going to go to this map here. Okay, so, this why this popped up. This is probably we're talking about. So, Arc Pro in terms of like updates is a lot different from Arc Desktop, and it's pretty common to do it this way, and with a lot of more modern software packages. So basically, like let me see what I have installed. I think it's Arc 10.7. I'm not sure. So if you have a software update available, if you go up here to the corner, it's going to have a little blue dot on this bell, which is like your notifications. And then here it says I have a software update. If I click on more info, learn more, it'll go over here to the about, and it's telling me that I have an update available. So let's see, I'm currently running 10.8.0, and now 10.8.1 is available. So I could download this and then install the update. This works pretty well, at least I've never had an issue with it. So instead of uninstalling the software and reinstalling the new version, you can effectively just do the update here, and then it'll still be able to access all of your files and projects and whatnot. And generally runs pretty quick. So the updating process is a lot simpler. So basically, if you have an update, it'll have a bell with a blue dot on it, and then you go in here, download it, it'll install it, and then when you open it back up, you should be able to access all of your stuff again, all your projects and everything. I just saw that pop up, so I thought it'd be worth discussing that for a second. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples of just pulling in data from some different sources. Yeah, someone just noted they updated this morning and with no issues. Again, it's pretty good, foolproof process so far. So I think that's a big improvement. Okay, so let's look at first, let's connect to a service. So if I go to connections here, see there's a bunch of different options. So you can connect to like Arc servers, you can connect to like other servers, so like web map services, web feature services, kind of using the open data standards. You can add connections to like locators and all kinds of stuff. And like to databases and stuff locally. All right, so what I want to do is add a connection to an Arc server. So I'm going to click on new ArcGIS server, and then it wants the URL. So I already have that page up. So I just opened up the mapwestvirginia.gov page here. And what we want to do is connect to, we're going to use this link here. So copy it there, dump this in. If you're using a server that has authenticate, like a username and password requirement, you have to put those in here, but there isn't one for this, so we don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to hit OK. And generally, if nothing happens, that means it worked. If for some reason it couldn't connect, then something didn't work. So some things that may happen is like the server could be down, or maybe it requires a password and you put in the wrong password. HTTPS versus HTTP, you know, those type of issues. All right, so now if I want to actually access layers from that, I have to go back to the Add Data button. And now underneath of project, I should have servers listed there. So let me open that up. And there we can see the West Virginia map services there, and there's all the services. So for example, I'm just going to add in, let's see here. What do we want to add in? I'm just going to stream in some, trying to pick something that's not going to eat up a bunch of bandwidth. Grab the CRR imagery. Okay, so here I'm just streaming in the NAPE 2014 NAPE orthophotography for the state. So that's coming in as a service. One thing that is different is if you, I haven't done this for a while in ArcMap, to be honest, but generally you would go into catalog and then you would create a server connection, and then those like services would be available in all of your map projects. The way this works is I'm just setting up this connection for this specific project. So for example, if I would go back to this other map that I made and go in here to add data, you know, it doesn't say servers there, and that's because I made that connection in that other project, and it doesn't port over to the other ones. So it is kind of a project by project thing. Okay, so anyway, that's streaming in a layer from a service. Let's look at some other options. So for example, under a portal, there's a couple different options here, and what you'll see will be different. It depends on what rights you have and like what portals you're connected to and stuff. So for example, the Living Atlas of the World, that's curated by Esri, and it's just a bunch of data layers that they have. Let's look at, so this is something that they just released a few days ago, I believe. Yeah, here you can see it was released on June 24th. So Esri and a couple other partners released a worldwide land cover based off Sentinel data. So it's like a 10-meter product or 10-meter resolution, and that's on here now. So I'm just going to add that, and this should stream in that raster data. There it goes. So this is an Esri land cover product that's global. And I think it's like basically works as tiles. So let's just, I'm in the projection. So anyway, there's drawing in for the whole US. I'm going to turn this off in a minute. It's probably going to eat up a bunch of bandwidth. So anyway, that's an example of streaming in data from Esri. Sometimes you can export data out. It depends on what type of file it is. Let's get rid of that. So if you have access to the Living Atlas, I'd recommend just having a look at that. It's pretty cool. Yeah, and then you can also search. So let's just search for like US Census and see what they have. I'll just grab this first one here. So that brings in a service there. Okay, so anyway, that's the Living Atlas. Couple other notes just outside of your local machine. So ArcGIS Online, that's stuff that's stored in ArcGIS Online, which is like, you know, Esri content and stuff, similar to Living Atlas. My organization is content that's shared with you in your organization. So I'm a W, so I'm seeing some W content here. my groups are groups that I'm involved with. So in Arc Online, you can create groups, and then people in that group can have access to that. So I'm working on like a web mapping project for a watershed. So some of these layers relate to that project. In my content, that's actually my ArcGIS Online content. So it's all the stuff I have saved on ArcGIS Online is, feature services, hosted feature layers, tiled map services, whatever. So just real quick, I'm going to grab something. So this is streaming in this base map. One thing that's kind of, I guess this has been a couple years now. We're not really going to talk about this. This is kind of a side thing, but Esri has generated vector tile versions of all their base maps. So you can actually go into one of the Esri base maps and edit its symbology, like change the fonts, change the colors used for different things. So that's what this is. It was an Esri base map that I fiddled around with and changed some of the default settings. And then that vector tile base map was saved to my ArcGIS Online content. And then I can basically go to my Arc Online content and use that as a base map in my current, in my projects. So that's something I'd recommend looking into is Esri vector tile base maps. If you haven't, they're pretty cool. Yeah, someone noted here that if you have, you can create templates from projects, and then if you create a template, then it should maintain the connections that you have made when you reuse it. So I guess that's one way to have your connections move over. And then someone else said that if you add connections to favorites, then they'll always show up in new projects. So I guess that's a couple ways to maintain your connections or your connections between projects. Okay. Okay, I think that's good with that. Let's look at some data symbology stuff. Symbology hasn't changed a whole lot other than that there are a couple new options and how you access those panes are a little bit different. One thing that's changed a good bit with Pro is there isn't a lot of the buried properties menus like you had with ArcMap, where you would click on something, go to properties, and within properties you would click on properties again, right? And that would get you to a menu to change stuff. Instead, they work a lot more with either the tabs at the top or panes that pop up on the side. So symbology is similar, but it's going to be, you're going to make these changes in panes now as opposed to like in a properties pop-up. And another thing that still exists that you can still use are layer files. So if you want to save your symbology, you can save it as a layer file, and then you can import that back in to use it or to apply it to another map or sorry, another data layer. So let's look at that let's look at a layer file example real quick. So this is a data layer I pulled from the West Virginia GIS Tech Center. This is a land cover map that was generated from the NAPE data for 2016. So I just pulled this in, and by default there are 6 categories. So it shows up as a unique symbol type symbology, but we don't actually have like the colors we want to assign to the different categories, and we don't have like titles or anything. So if I wanted to use a layer file for this, I can just click on it and go to Symbology. So this is right click and then Symbology. That opens up the Symbology tab. And if you wanted to use a layer file, then under this hamburger menu here, you can do import from layer file. And then we just navigate to where we have our layer file stored. Let's see here, should be under there. And that's the layer file .layer. And then it should pull that in, and yep, that's the wrong one. That was a different map. Let me go to, forgot I had 2 versions of that on here. This one. There we go. Okay, So anyway, this pulls the symbology that I want. So now I have everything set up. And then if I wanted to save that, I mean, there's really no point because I have it saved because I just used it. But if you wanted to save a symbology as a layer file, then we can just go to data, or sorry, sharing, and then save as layer file. And then you can do that. You can save that out. Let me see here for later use. Let me pull that up. Just put it in here. So save. And then if I wanted, I could reapply that symbology. Okay, let's just look at playing with symbolizing a couple different layers. I'm going to go over to this Indiana map. So this just has some county boundaries for Indiana, and that's it. So what I'd like to do is just play around with this and actually show some of the attributes. So again, if I just go to Symbology, that pops up the Symbology pane over here. And then you have your symbology options. So the default is single symbol, obviously. If you want to symbolize something categorical, you have unique values. And if you want something continuous or a quantitative variable, then you've got all your different thematic symbologies there. One thing that was added, which I don't think existed in ArcMap, is bivariate colors. What that means is you can actually symbolize on two different attributes, and it creates a bivariate choropleth. So we'll look at that since that's new. But first off, let's just change this to unique values. And this has some voting results in it. So this is the 2012 presidential race. So there, just grab those two, the two Democrat or Republican categories there. Note that by default, generally it has this all other values. In this case, that's useless because they're all one or the other. So if I go under this more tab here, I can turn that show all other values off, so I don't have that. And then you can go in and change the, obviously the symbology if you want. Right. So that's a unique values for something that's categorical. Graduated colors is like choropleth, is basically choropleth without any, this is choropleth. So this is basically the same setup. So let's grab something continuous. So let's do percent GT55. So this is the percent of the population that's older than 55. You can normalize by a variable, change the number of categories, change the color scheme. One thing that's a little different is changing the labels. So how you do that is you just edit it here. So you can go in and click on this and then edit it. So we'll just do this as low, right? And then that'll change that over here. So that's your kind of graduated colors choropleth maps. There's this new, I don't know, maybe this wasn't ArcMap. If it was, I never really used it. Unclassified colors is choropleth maps, but without any binning. So you don't have to pick, like a classification method and a number of bins. It just stretches a color ramp through the values. Again, change this to something that makes sense. Let's look at the bivariate one, because I think that's actually pretty cool. So in bivariate, it allows you to symbolize two different variables. So let's do percent poverty, and I don't know what would be. Let's do percent voting Republican, and then you can change the color ramp here, and you can also change how it's configured. So here's like a diamond shape. So here we basically have two color ramps. One is a blue ramp, the other one's an orange ramp. So for example, this is showing the percent poverty is in blue, and then the percent voting Republican is in orange. So if it's just high for percent poverty, it's going to be your dark blues. If it's just high for voting Republican, it's dark orange. This mix of both is high for both, and then obviously this is low for both, right? So it's a nice way to visually or graphically compare two variables. You can also use like categorical variables too as one of the options. So anyway, I believe that's a new symbology option that wasn't there before. Let's see here. Okay, that's that. We talked about, yeah, we basically already looked through this. Again, just the different types of symbology that you can use for different types of features. All right, this is kind of a broad topic. If anyone has any questions about messing around with symbology or anything, feel free to ask. I think it's similar. It's similar to Arc Pro, Arc Desktop. It's just that it's accessed a little bit differently now with these panes and whatnot. All right, so let's look at this next topic then. So this is, I believe, kind of new to Pro, is you can create pop-ups to go along with data layers, and then you can actually edit how those pop-ups look. The main reason I use this is if I'm going to create a map layout that I want to use in a web map, then if you create a pop-up in Pro and then you publish that map to ArcGIS Online, then it's actually going to honor that. So you can make your pop-ups in Pro and opposed to doing all the pop-up editing in Arc Online if you want. So you can change the name of the pop-up, you can add text, you can change what fields are shown or not shown, you can change the alias names, you can add charts, add graphs. So let's just look at a few examples of that. I think I'm just going to stick, well, let me see get at this Europe one. Let me see what's in the attribute table before we start. Well, there's nothing in there. We'll use this Indiana map instead, because it actually has some layers. So if we click on this, has a default pop-up, and by default, the title is going to be the first string or character field or text field that's in the table. So it's just using the state abbreviation, which doesn't make a lot of sense in this case. And then it shows you all of the attributes, and it uses the alias names if they're there. If not, it just uses the field name. So we can make this look a lot cleaner by editing it. All right, so if we go into our, if we right click on the layer here, you can, first off, if you can enable or disable pop-ups. So if we disable, there just won't be any pop-ups now. And then if it's enabled, then you can configure it. So we're going to go into configure, and then you play around with it. So I'm going to open up the attribute table because that'll make it easier to see the attribute names. So the title here, it just again used the first character field, which was this state field. So we're going to change it to county. So I'm going to swap this out for county. In here, anything that's in curly brackets is going to be a field name. So I'm just going to put in here some text. So county name, and then colon, and then the county name pulled from the attribute. So now if we click on this, it says county name and then the county name there. And then if we go into the fields here, click on this little pencil to do the editing, we can turn things on and off. All right, so right now they're all displayed. That's the default. So I'm going to turn that off. We're just going to show the winners, their percentages. I think that's good. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to turn that off now. Now if I go in here, I just have those columns that I selected. They're still not super clean because they're using the field names, and that's because I never set up any alias names. So we'll look at that in a second. I just want to show you can have multiple things in the title. So we could do like county name, and then we could do comma FIPS, and then we could put in the FIPS code as another part of the county. I guess it'll be FIPS. Yeah, that'll work. So now if I click on this, now it has the county name and the FIPS code as the title. Okay, so what if you wanted to have nice, clean names here? So you do that with alias, with an alias name. So to accomplish that, I'm going to click, well, okay, if you have the attribute table open, if you go to data, I believe, then you can open up this fields view, and that basically kind of like transposes the table. So you can see all of the fields as opposed to all the records. That's something that's completely new as far as I'm aware. So whenever you're doing editing in a table, you have basically the original table view where you have all the rows and all the associated data and columns. And then this other view, which is the fields view, lists out all the fields in the table and their characteristics. So for example, it tells you the data type, it tells you whether it can have null values, like formatting issues, whether it's read only, whether it's visible. So if you want to like make things not visible, you can turn them off over here. So what I want to do is edit some of the attributes, alias names. So I'm just going to do winter 2012, winter 2008, percent Democrat. Remember, like with tables, there are rules about like column names, like how long they can be. We can have spaces. So these alias names just allow you to have a cleaner name that shows up for display. Probably going to spell a bunch of stuff wrong since I'm doing this in person. Percent 55. Okay. And I'm going to hit save there. That actually is editing the data. So it's updating the alias names. So now if we go in here, it should use those alias. Oops. Here. So now it should see those alias names. You can see the alias names there. I'm going to turn off a couple of these that I didn't edit. Turn off all these. Percent. Let's do that. All right, so now let me go back to this. Let me close this and go back to the Indiana map. So that's pretty clean. Now we have a usable title with the FIPS code and the county name, and we also have all of our nice clean alias names used. All right, well, one other thing you can do is add other types of features. So images, charts, carousels, or basically rotate through like images and charts and whatnot. Let's add a chart. Okay, so we're going to call this voting results. And what we want to do, we're going to make a pie chart, and we want to just have the 3 percentages. So for the voting, so Democrat, Republican, and other, and they don't need to be normalized. Okay, I think that should do it. So now if we click on this, why did that not work? That's something wrong. Oh, there it goes. It's supposed to not updated. And then we have a little chart here. One thing I've never figured out how to do, it seems lame, and maybe there's a way to do it, is to actually change the colors to correspond with something. I'm not sure why it doesn't let you do that, would be nice to obviously have like the red and blue and something, right? I'm not sure. I'll be honest, I'm not sure how to do that. There are some more complicated things you can do with pop-ups. So for example, there's ways you can do like number formatting, add percentage signs, add units, stuff like that. That's a little more advanced. But anyway, there's other things you can do. But that's just cleaning up the pop-ups. Okay, so that's a little bit about pop-ups. Let's see. I think this would be a good time to take like a 5-minute break. So let's just take a quick 5-minute break until I guess it's 10:06 now. So like let's just do until 10:12, and then I'll jump back in and we'll look at some just digitizing related stuff.
Sounds good. Thanks, Aaron. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Don't go anywhere, but just keep your cameras off or whatever you need to do, and we'll get back at 10:12, you said.
I'm ready to get started again if everyone else is. Let's get back into it. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about digitizing and drawing. I think this has been improved a good bit, and I like drawing in Pro a lot more than I like drawing in ArcMap. There's obviously a lot you can do with this, especially if you want to talk about things like topology rules and whatnot. I just want to just show you some quick tricks, and so that you kind of see at least how the workflow is different. Okay, so let's say I'm going to go back to this land cover map, and I'm going to add in a connection to some photos. So we have something to draw on top of. I'm going to use the Tech Center's leaf off mosaic since that's some pretty high res stuff. We'll zoom into Morgantown here. Let's see. Yeah, let's just look at this area. So this is the Evansdale WVU campus. So a couple different buildings here we can look at. So, first thing we need to do if we're going to draw is we need to have a layer we can draw into. So I'm going to go into my geoprocessing toolbar here and look for create feature class and create feature class. So you can see by default there, it's going to save it as a feature class into the default database for the project. So that's fine, but you could save it someplace else. If you save it outside of a geodatabase, it can't be a feature class. You're gonna have to put the, save it as a shape file. So let's call this Mon County, or I guess features. And then obviously a type, and we don't need M or Z. And then I'm just gonna use the current map, which should be 17 North. And that should be it. So I'm going to hit run, and that should just generate a blank layer, a polygon layer to draw into. And before I get started, I'm just going to change the symbology here to just a red outline. It's easier to draw. Okay, so we should be ready to get started now. All right, so now that we have some layers that can be edited, there's now an edit tab. And if we click on that to actually kind of start editing, you want to either click on modify or create. Modify is obviously to change something that exists, whereas create's creating something from scratch. Under snapping here, you can set up the snapping rules and the tolerances and whatnot. And then under topology, you can go in here and set up topological rules if you're worried about that when you're drawing. And there's also some tools for like assessing topological errors and stuff in your drawing. I'm not going to do anything complicated, so I'm just going to draw some features without any topological rules. So clicking create is equivalent to like entering editing mode in ArcGIS Online, or sorry, ArcMap. And then clicking save is basically saving your edits. As far as I'm aware, there's no like autosave feature similar to ArcMap. So if you spend like 8 hours drawing and you never save anything and then your system crashes, it's gone, right? So you have to remember to click save often so you don't lose any information. Again, so I don't think there's any way you can set up like an autosave, but I might be wrong. Okay, so let's just draw a building real quick, and let's pick something that's not that complicated. So I'm going to draw in this building real quick. All right, so there's a simple outline. A couple just notes on some of the other tools. I'm just going to go into this field here and draw some shapes. This is autocomplete. This draws, but it maintains right angles only. So it won't let me move off the right angles once you've created 2 vertices. So that can be useful for drawing in like more regular features. And then obviously these are shapes. Freehand, basically you just hold down the mouse and go. So it's just dropping vertices every so often. Those are the ones that I use most often. So once you have a feature, let me get rid of these since they're dumb. Click on this too. Once you have a feature, I'm just going to draw a circle real quick. And you want to actually, like, say, manipulate it somehow, then you can go into edit, and then you can mess with some of the modify options. So for example, move just translates it, so you can move it to a new location. Rotate makes no sense for a circle probably, but scale is for scaling stuff, obviously. One thing I use a good bit when I'm drawing that I think is useful is things like split and merge. So let's say, for example, we want to break this into a couple different features. I could do split here. I just created a line and broke it into two parts. And now they're two separate things, so I can move them separately, right? So grab move here, move this up. Merge is the opposite. So you can select multiple features and merge them all together. So now, even though these are not spatially contiguous, they are one feature again. Yeah, so anyway, that's just some simple drawing tools. One thing you can do, which honestly I've never done, but I've watched people do it, is you can edit in 3D now. So you can, if you have a scene, you can actually create like 3D buildings and generate the walls and everything. If you want to know anything about that, there's tons of YouTube videos on that. I don't really have anything. I don't know how to do it, honestly. And I don't really have anything that I could draw. So this is just some simple drawing. Let's look at looking at manipulating attributes. So again, I'm gonna hit save here. So it saves my edits. And then I should be able to go in and edit the attribute table. Okay, so if you want to add attributes, again, this is a feature class, so it's going to have some of the default fields. So the object ID, if it was a shape file, it would have like the FID, the shape type, the shape length, shape area. But if I want to add some other fields, I can do that. So to do that, I click on add here, and that opens up this fields view. Again, you can get through it if you go to data, you can click on it here. That does the same thing. So let's just create like a, I don't know, call it type field, and we'll make that text, and it can be, we'll just leave it at 255. Okay, so that just should have just added that field. And I don't know, we'll just do like a area field, and we'll make that a double so we have decimal values. Okay, so now if I go, yes. So now if I go back here, we see we have those two new columns, and I should be able to edit into them. So it's called building one. And then if I want to do something like calculations, there's two options. You can get to that through the geoprocessing pane. So if I go to analysis, tools, I think it's just calculate geometry attributes. So we'll just do this, and we'll use our area field, and in there we want to calculate the area. We'll just do it in, let's do area, and then we'll do it in hectares, and we'll use the current map. And then that populates the area there in hectares. Another way to do it is you can right click on the field and do calculate geometry. You can also do like calculate field, again, if you're doing math or working with strings or tables. For the heck of it, let's just do And then let me do add here. Note that it won't let you do any changes to the attribute table or whatnot until you save. So that's similar to ArcMap. And so I just saved that. So now I can add a field again. I'm just going to add another, let's call it text 2. And we'll make it text and save. So if I wanted to do something here, like a field calculation, I'm going to do, let's see here. I'm trying to remember how to do a concatenate. Trying to remember how to do it. And we can just maybe just add them. So we'll do name is, and then plus, and then this. Let's see if that works. Nope. I guess I probably have to do with concat or something. Anyway, there's a function here for like, merging or concatenating strings. I'll just do a duplicate of this real quick. This will just duplicate the name twice, right? That's all it's doing. Anyway, so those things, the field calculations and like geometric calculations are all pretty consistent or pretty similar to how you would do it in ArcMap, but the editing's a little different. And I think it is improved. It's a lot easier to move around. Another thing that you can do is if you have data layers that are in separate locations, like in different geodatabases or different file paths, you can still edit them all at once. So instead of having like just the files from one location pop up, it should pop up everything that's editable at once. Okay, so that's a little bit of just some simple editing. Okay, all right, so we looked at geometric fields, right? So adding geometries and then adding fields we looked at. Okay, and then last thing that's kind of related to data symbology is changing visibility scales. So here's this land cover data set. So let's say that we wanted it to only display or turn on at certain scales. So to do that, if you click on a layer and go to properties, there should be is it display? No, it's under general, sorry. So in beyond, so we're gonna have it not show if it's in past, I don't know, let's just do 1 to 50,000. And then it will also disappear if you zoom out past 1 to 100,000. So this layer should only be visible between those two ranges. So right now I'm at 1 to 128,000, so it's not visible. And there I'm in the visibility range, so it pops back on. And then now I'm out of the visibility range, so it pops back off. So that's one way that you can control layer visibility, is setting visibility scale. So you could have one layer turn on and another layer turn off at a certain scale. You could actually have multiple versions of the same layer and then have the symbology change at different scales. So that can be useful, especially if you're doing something like making a layout or like a base map. Oh, and I guess this is a good quick side note on that. So if you go into insert here, you can see there's a couple different options. We have maps, scenes, local scenes, stereo maps, and base maps. What base maps are, which is kind of neat, is you can create a base map using your own layers or whatever layers you want, and then you can then save that base map in the project and use it as a base map in all your other maps or scenes. So for example, if I just did like, I'm just gonna go in here and add in some imagery. That's that. So now if I wanted to, let me just do a save real quick. So this is this new base map object. So now if I went into here, I could turn off the Esri base map and this. And now if I go under base map, it has my base map layer, and I can use that as a map, a base map. So anyway, that's what this base map option is. Basically, you can make your own base maps and then use it in your scenes and maps within your project. So that's a good way to do a custom base map. Okay, and then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because honestly, out of all the things that changed, I think the layout design is one of the biggest changes. Initially, I thought it was weird and I didn't like it, but now that I've played with it for a while, I actually think it is an improvement. So I'm just gonna go through like the process of generating a map layout just to show you some of the new techniques and you know just how it's different. Obviously, this is complicated, so you could do like a whole couple of days just on map layout design. But I just wanted to highlight some of the key differences. Okay, so up to this point, we've basically just been working with maps. We haven't used any scenes or any layouts. So I'd like to now make a layout. So I'm going to make a layout from this Europe map. So I already have it symbolized the way that I want. So I have these European countries, and they're symbolized based on this hypothetical trip. So whether or not that country was visited during a trip or not. Excuse me. So the orange was visited, and then the gray was not visited. And then I have all the country boundaries underneath of that just for reference. And then I also changed the background color to blue just so it looks like the ocean. How I did that, by the way, is we go into properties, under general, you can change the background color there. So that's what I did. So that's fine. So that's basically what I wanted. So let's say now I want to actually make a nice map layout out of this. So the first thing I need to do is create a new layout. So to do that, I go to Insert and then New Layout. And then by default, you have all these different common paper sizes. You can change the size afterwards though, so it really doesn't matter. I'm just going to use like, let's just use this kind of square. They'll just use this 9x12, this back of it. Now, if I didn't like that size, if I want to change it, I can just go into the properties here, and then you can change it. So you can change the orientation, and you can also change the actual dimensions. Note now, this is a really big difference between Pro and ArcMap. Is I have this contents pane over here, but this is not a map contents pane. It's a map layout contents pane. So this is going to have all your map content. So if we add a map frame, that'll show up. If we add a legend or a title or some text or a scale bar. So in short, map layouts now have their own content panes that show all your graphical layers as opposed to your map layers. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is add a map to this. So to do that, I click on map frame here, and that'll show me all the maps that I have in the map or in this project. So I want to use this, this map here of Europe. So I'm just going to draw out where I want it to pop up in the layout space. I'm just going to do that for now. Okay, so note here that it didn't take in my background color. And that's because that's just for the map layout. It's not, doesn't apply to like the graphic. So if I wanted to change the background color here, I'd have to edit that. So I'm just clicking on this and going to properties. And then under this thing that looks like a paintbrush, I can change the background. It's hollow by default. So I can make it blue, and that gives me my blue background back. There's lots of pop-up menus when you're dealing with map design. But I find that they kind of work their way to you. So you'll see a lot of these different things like frames and property menus pop up as I click on different things. Once you have a map in a layout, you kind of have an issue where you've got two spaces that you could move in, right? You can move within the page or the paper or the layout space, or you might want to move the map around if you want to adjust the extent or the center or the scale or whatever. So how ArcPro deals with that is if you want to manipulate a map frame, you have to right click on it and then do activate. And then that'll gray out the rest of the layout and allows you to then, then allows you to work and move around inside of the map frame. So I'm going to try to center this over Europe a bit. Maybe something like that. And then to get out of that mode, if I click on the X here, then now it's back into the working in the layout space. So anyway, if you want to move the map around, scale, translate, whatever, you can just go to activate and then you can move it. And then when you have it where you want, you can click on the X and that gets you back into the layout space. So that's how you work with two map spaces. Okay, or two different spaces, map and layout. Okay, so there's a basic map frame. I'm going to add like a lat long Graticule grid to it. So to do that, I want to do grid. And I'm just going to grab this default one. And that adds on a lat long grid. So I'd like to play around with this a bit. So clean it up. I always find I don't like the default settings for the Graticules. So I always want to play around with that a bit. So it noted that it added this new layer now under layout, this black horizontal label Graticules. So if I click on that, or if I click properties, or even if I double click, it'll open up properties for it over here. Okay, so I'm gonna play around with this. In order to let me change stuff, I have to click off this auto adjust. That kind of screws everything up. So I clicked off of that. And then you have all your different components of your Graticules. So you have your labels, your tick marks, your major, your minor tick marks, and then your grid lines. So for example, I don't want the grid lines. I just would like to have the marks around the side. So I can just click on this and that gets rid of it. And you can see it updated it there. Sometimes if you're doing a lot of stuff, it doesn't want to update. So you can click on the refresh down here and that should fix that. Then for the labels, I like to make them bigger. So I'm going to click on symbol here and we just go into appearance and we'll do, I don't know, let's pop it up to like 14. That's probably too big. Let's pop it down to like 12. That seems fine. I think they're a little too dense. So I'm going to go back to the labels here and note they're being labeled every 5 degrees. So I'm just going to pop that up to every 10 degrees instead. You can also change the orientation. So like on the sides, we could make the west and east oriented differently. And then one thing that's weird here is because this is a conic projection is we have some like lat longs that are on the opposite margins because they run off the page. I'm not sure like how to delete those, to be honest. I'm going to remove these. Let's see, which one's the majors and minors? Let's forget. I'm going to take the tick marks here, those small ones, and just get rid of them. And this one I want it to match with my labels. So I'm just going to turn this into 10. Okay, cool. And then let's say we're happy with that. One thing I like to do is get rid of these marks over here. Actually, I'm going to add back in the grid lines in retrospect because it's kind of confusing the way that it is because of, so I'm going to just make it fit with the labels. We're just having one every 10. That way it kind of makes sense why it's like there's labels on the margins there. Okay, not perfect, but good enough for now. So we'll leave that alone. We'll probably need a little legend to explain our classification here. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click on legend, draw out a legend. The legend editing, I think, is a lot better. So if I click on this drop down, that's got all your legend items in there. The world countries is kind of just a background layer. So I think we could just get rid of that. So that's off. And then for the European countries, we really don't need the layer name or the heading. We just want the labels there. So I just did that. Here you can change the size of the hatches. So I'm going to bump them up a little bit, make it 30. There we go. So there we just have our two labels. I'm just going to move them down here. This is something I really think they improved. I don't know for turning off like headers and stuff in a legend, you used to have to go into like a ton of properties menus. Now you can just go over to this pane and turn them on and off, which I think is nice. Okay, so we'll put that down there. Let's add a scale bar. So you go to insert, scale bar. I'm just going to pick to grab this. Well, actually, I like that one. Let's do this one. So to grab a create a scale bar there. Now, when you have an item and you select it, then it adds a couple tabs up here for manipulating that specific item. So if I go to format, for example, I can change the font. So I'm going to change this into Tahoma to match the legend there, or the text, the Graticules. You can change the color. You can change the fill and stroke. So you have all these like graphical options here. The design, we're going to leave it in units. I'm going to change the label just to KM, and I'm going to put the label, we'll just do below center. So it puts it down there as opposed to on the end. And then I'm just going to, yeah, I think that's fine. You can also change the number of divisions and subdivisions and stuff. So for example, if I drop subdivisions to 0, it'll just have the major divisions there. But we'll leave it where it was. All right. I think that works. I don't think really need to do much else. The one thing you can do just as a, so let's say you didn't want the like really, I'm just going to drop that down a little. Oh, that does all of them. I guess I'd have to change and do that. So like anything, let me just edit this too while I'm at it. So I'm going to pop up the font size here a little bit. There we go. And then, so if you get to a point where you can't edit things anymore, you can always convert stuff into graphics. I'm going to do convert to graphic. Again, you should do that. You should wait to do that until you're done, because if you change anything in the map, it's not going to update it. And then I'm going to do an ungroup. There we go. So then I'm going to take these and just put them down here in the bottom, make a more horizontally aligned legend. Something like that. Okay, and then let's add a north arrow. Probably don't need north arrow, scale bar, and graticules, but I'm just showing you how to add stuff. Let's do something that's this here. Let's see here. I guess we probably want a title. I guess so. This is the text. You can see you can add a bunch of different types of text there. So let's do this. And let's go in here and change some of our text. Let's probably tone it down a little bit. It's kind of big. So just to finish up, let's just to show you a couple other things about. Say this looks like this maybe needs to be portrait instead. Well, let's just change the dimensions. We're just going to do a thing that's 10 by 10. Change the shape there a little bit. Change that back to, we'll do 10 by 11. So just mess around with the paper size. And I'll make it a little bit taller. Since we only converted the legend to a graphic, we can still make changes to the extent, right? Because that's going to update the scale bar. But if we convert the scale bar to a legend, probably would be a bad idea to stuff around. I'm going to just put this in the map space here. Move these up here. So there's a pretty simple layout. One other thing I'll do just for the heck of it is if say we wanted to add labels, to do that, I would go back to the map. So I'm going to go back to this Europe map. And then under that layer, I would turn the labels on. By default, it's going to use the first it's going to use the first text field, which was the name in this case. So that works. But as you can see, it adds a ton of labels because there's a lots of like sub pieces to each feature. So we're definitely going to want to edit that. So I'm going to go into label properties. And if you're familiar with a lot of the labeling that was in our desktop, so for example, using like the Maplex engine, that's still built into Pro, but it just looks a little different. So if we go into here, this is all like the Maplex engine stuff under position. So placement, let's see here. There should be in here an option to remove duplicate labels. So we're going to do remove all. And then we should just, whenever that updates, now we just have one label for each one. Since these are countries, we're going to change it to a land parcel type. And then if we wanted, we could go into symbol, and I'm just going to, I'll leave it at 10, but like we could add like a little halo or something behind it. So we'll say that's fine for now. So now if I go back to the layout, it should have updated that and added those in. There's a lot more you could do with that, obviously, but you know, that's just some simple labeling stuff. All right, so let's say we're happy with that. I know it's not great, but don't want to eat up a ton of time. So, so I'm going to go to share now, and I can do export layout. And again, you have some of your options here. One thing that doesn't exist in Pro is AI files, which is kind of annoying, especially if you do a lot of post-processing or vector editing. So if you want to export to an AI file, well, you have to actually use this AIX format, which is Adobe Illustrator Exchange. And then you have to save that to like a Creative Cloud account. And then you can pull it from the Creative Cloud account and convert it into an AI file, which is super annoying. So generally what I do is I just save it as a PDF or an SVG, which is another vector graphic format. And then I bring it into Illustrator and just convert it into an Illustrator file. I generally find that works fine for me, even though it's not perfect. So let's do that for this case. I'm just going to convert, I'm going to save it as a PDF. We'll save it on the desktop there. I'm going to do export. Okay, so now if I wanted to do some post-processing with that, I'm just going to open up Illustrator just so you can see that. Maybe being slow. And obviously, by the way, if you want to just export out a raster graphic file, you have all your raster graphics, JPEG, PNG, TIFF, all that stuff. Okay, so here's my, this is my Creative Cloud or my Adobe Illustrator. So let me just find that file I just made. So layout PDF there. Apparently, didn't have the font available for my scale bar. I won't worry about that for now. Okay, so anyway, this is a PDF file and it maintains stuff, right? So you could go in here and move stuff around. Oh, I guess there's a feature there. Just grab something that's not overlapping with other things. Right, so if I want to get rid of that, I could delete it. I could go in here and change colors. You could do all your post-processing that way. You can save it out as a, a raster file or do a save as and save it from PDF to AI file if you want. So that's how you would export out something if you want to do some post-processing. If you just wanted to like a raw, or a raster graphic, we could do, I'm just going to do a PNG and do that. export. And then that created this PNG file here, which by default has a transparent background. That's why the white disappeared. But I could turn that off, run that again, and then it should have a background color now. So anyway, there's the output there as a PNG raster file as opposed to a vector graphic. All right, just a couple other quick things before we move on from this. So let's say that you wanted to make copies of things. Like I got this the way that I wanted, but I wanted to do some slight tweaking to it. So one thing I could do is copy it. So to do that, I can go into the catalog. And if I go into layouts, then I can click on that layout. I can do copy and then paste. That makes a copy of it. And then I'm just going to rename it here to Europe Map 2 and open it. So now I have a copy of that map that I could do editing to. So for example, I could say I wanted to get rid of the grid here. Remove. So now I have a copy without the Graticules on it, and I have this copy too. So you have multiple map layouts there. One thing that people get worried about is let's just say I click on this, let's just do this Indiana map. I click on it and it's gone. That doesn't mean you deleted the map. So if you click on things and get rid of them, if you just go into the catalog, so I would go into my maps there, then I could click on this and open it, and that adds it back. So just exiting out of these, it doesn't delete them. It just doesn't show them. So if you want to get them back, you just go into the catalog and click on the object, and then you can do an open. Now, if you go into the catalog and click on a map, like let's see here. Oh, we might use that later. Leave that alone. I'm just going to make a map real quick. New map. So here's a new base map. So if I would go into the here and click delete in the catalog, that actually deletes it. So it'll disappear from the project permanently, but it actually gives you a warning message there. So anyway, if you just exit out, something's fine. You can just get it back in the catalog view. You can do the same thing with maps, by the way. So like if I wanted to make a copy of, say, this Indiana map, I could just do copy, paste, and then it just adds a 1 on the end there. And I can open up and I have 2 copies of that map that aren't linked to each other. So I could edit that one and maintain the original. Anyway, so that's that. All right, so I just want to discuss scenes a little bit and linking scenes, and then ArcGIS Online, moving stuff to ArcGIS Online, and then the back end we'll look at some analysis related stuff for the last hour. I actually, to be honest, don't do a lot of work in scenes. I just don't do a lot of 3D work or visualization work. I tend to do a lot more like analysis in like a 2D space. But again, it's all integrated into one place now. So there really isn't like an arc scene. It's just part of Pro. So if you want to add a 3D scene, if you go to Insert and click down here, you have Map, Base maps, which we looked at, and then we have global and local scene. Global scenes are generally used if you want to have like a complete digital globe or a small scale map, get the continent to global scale. And local scene allows you to make 3D scenes more like a local scale, like a city scale. So I'm just going to do a new global scene real quick. And as you see there, if I go back to catalog, it should have added that. Let's see here. Is it under maps or scenes? Yeah, so it's still under maps. And there's the scenes, and you can see they got the globe view there. And by default, it's just going to load up a digital globe. Has a little navigator down here for navigation. If you hit this expand, it gives you some additional options. Right. So, yep. Anyway, so that's that. Let's just add some 3D layer to this real quick. So I'm going to go into map, add, and then let's look at living at, actually let's do Arc Online. Let's see. I'm trying to think of a good data layer. Maybe that's actually, let's see. Let me see if this is what I think it is. Okay, so here's a bunch of building footprints in Montreal. Yeah, it looks like they're already 3D. So if we turn this, you can see that that pulled that in from the the Living Atlas, or sorry, ArcGIS Online from Esri content, and drop those in for us, and they're already symbolized in 3D. I'm going to get rid of that because I'm assuming that's eating up bandwidth, so we're going to get rid of that. Okay, you can also convert like maps into 3D or 3D into maps. So for example, here I have this data layer or this map over the point area in Pittsburgh. So I just have a little aerial photo there, and then the building footprints, and it's just 2D. So if I want to convert this into a scene, I would just go to Insert, no, Analysis, no. View. Okay, so you go to the View tab and then Convert, and we want to take this map and convert it into a local scene. So this is going through the process of doing that. Probably using a lot of GPU because of Zoom, so it might be kind of slow. But this should get there. So this should create a 3D scene from that. So now we should be able to move that in 3D. Note it already kind of draped the imagery and the data over top of an elevation surface. So there you can see like Mount Washington, for example. So by default, these scenes have, they use, yeah, so by default, they have, there's a worldwide like elevation model that it uses, but you can also go in here and change it out and use your own elevation surface or a different elevation surface if you want. We'll just use the default here. So these buildings are still displayed in 2D, but we like to display them in 3D. So to do that, I'm going to click on them over here and go to the Appearance tab. And then we have options for extrusion since we're now in 3D. So I'm going to do this as, I guess it's max height. And I want to pick a field to use. So we're going to use this max height in meters. And then that extrudes it out by this height that's in the attribute table. So there we have just some extruded buildings, but they're not textured or anything. So it's pretty simple. Another thing that you can do is you can link 2D and 3D maps. So for example, I'm going to click on these two. I don't know. Every time I do this, I tend to link the wrong one. So I'm just going to close everything else for now and get rid of that and this. So we just have our Pittsburgh map and then our Pittsburgh scene. So let's say we wanted to link these together. So if we go to View, there's this Link Views option, and let's do Center and Scale. And now let's split these up so we have two windows, so they're side by side, like so. So these things are supposed to be linked. So now if I move one, it moves the other, both centered and scaled. If we change the link to just center, then it'll maintain the center, but it doesn't rescale. So you can see this one, it's moving it a little to make sure it maintains the same center, but it's not zooming it in or out. Okay. Anyway, so that's an example of linking 3D scenes and and then maps. You can also link maps and scenes also, but that's just an example. Okay, and then kind of the last thing I wanted to show you before we move into working with like kind of analysis related stuff is how you can publish stuff out to ArcGIS Online. So first off, to be able to do this, you need to be actually logged into an ArcGIS Online account in Pro, which I am, and you have to have the rights to do publishing. So I'm set up as a publisher for the WV organization, so I'm allowed to do that. If you didn't have publishing rights, it's not going to let you do this. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the catalog here. I'm going to open up this to online map. Let me open that up. And there we go. So there's this map. So now I would like to take this map layout and move that over to an Arc Online map. Okay, so the first thing that's important with this is when you're working with online maps, you generally want all your data to either be in geographic coordinate system, specifically WGS84, or in the Web Mercator projection. If you try to, like this was originally in a UTM zone, I think 16 or something, or 17 or 18, I can't remember. You can't, it won't let you publish this out if it's not in one of the, if it's in that unique projection. So in order, basically what I did here, if we go back real quick to this Indiana map, open here. So let's look at the map properties. So the coordinate system, it's in 16 north, which won't work. So basically I made a copy of this map layout and I converted it to Web Mercator, I think. So let me look at this. Yeah, so it's Web Mercator auxiliary sphere. And to do that, I basically just changed the map projection and I also exported out the layer. So to do that, you could do, use the like project tool, and that allows you to, change the map projection of the layer. So anyway, that's important. If you aren't using WGS84 Web Mercator, WGS84 Web Mercator, it's gonna not let you do the publishing. So that should be fine. It generally also wants you to have a base map turned on. And other than that, I think that should be about it. Okay, so to actually share this, we go to the Share tab, and to push stuff out to Arc Online, it's generally under the Share As area. So if you do web layer, what that's going to do is it's just going to publish the web layers as hosted feature layers if you maintain the features, or it might convert them into tiled graphic layers if you're working with raster data. If you do the web map, it's going to publish this the data and also the web map itself. So that's what I want to do. So I'm going to click on web map, and that opens up the Share as Web Map pane. I'm going to give it a name here. We'll just call it West Virginia AGP Workshop. And if there's a red asterisk, you have to provide something. So example, web map publishing, and then some tags. Let's put West Virginia AGP. Okay. There's a couple of different configurations. We're just going to use exploratory there. And you could also save it to a location. Why are my folders not popped up? We'll just, seems like you should have my folders there. We'll just do create new folder, and we'll call it, let's see, let's call it workshop. And then you have sharing options. I'm just going to put WVU, so anybody in the WVU organization should be able to see it. If I put everyone, then those layers would be accessible by anyone that has an ArcGIS Online account. Okay. And we should have to change the configuration. Why is it not letting me? Sure why it's being weird. Seems like it's thinking about something. I'm not sure what it's thinking about. Oh, is it because it's linked maybe? No, that's not it. Not sure why this is being weird. It's just sitting there scrolling. Maybe I'm using up too much memory. Let's see in that. I think that might be why. Oh, there, man. I'm not sure what was being weird about. Oh, I guess it was just how our time linking to my content, apparently. Okay, so then if you click Analyze, it'll see if there are any issues that'll mess up publishing. So it didn't find any issues or warnings. Again, if I was in the wrong projection, it would tell me that, and I'd have to fix it. So it seems like it'll work. So I'm just going to hit Share, and then that should go through and do the publishing. I found that this is generally pretty fast unless you have really large layers. If you do have really large layers with a lot of vertices, one thing you might want to consider doing is generalizing them first. Because if you say have a feature service, then it has to actually transmit the raw data, the raw spatial data from the server to the client every time somebody uses your web map, it can be very slow. So you may want to do like a generalization to remove vertices. If it's really complicated and you just want people to visualize the data and not actually like be able to access like the attributes or use pop-ups, you could also just publish it as a tiled service, where effectively just converts it into a bunch of little images that gets transferred over. That's effectively how base maps work, for example. All right, so while that's running, I'm going to go over here to my content. Okay, so this is my content. Let me get rid of this. So inside of here, you should see, like, if you have ArcGIS Online set up, you have all like your folders and stuff. So whenever this is done, it should create a workshop folder with all that content in it, and look at that in a minute. Since this is being slow, we'll just let it work, and I'm just going to start talking about the next topic a little bit. Okay, so fortunately, from Arc Desktop to Arc Pro, there hasn't been a lot of changes in the way the toolbox works. I mean, the toolbox effectively looks the same once you have it up. You know, they have added some tools, moved some stuff around, they've renamed some stuff, but for the most part, it's the same layout. So effectively, you have like a main toolbox, and then inside of there, you have a bunch of sub toolboxes that group your tools, and then you can even have sub toolboxes within sub toolboxes. I've noticed with the more recent builds of Pro, the toolbox search has been a lot better. Like it's better about finding stuff if you like don't give it the exact name of the tool, or if you slightly, like you misspell it or something. Again, the tools you have access to are going to depend on your licensing levels and what you have activated. So I believe with Arc, the analysis toolbox ships with the base, but you have to pay extra if you want to have something like Spatial Analyst or 3D Analyst or Network Analyst. Spatial Analyst specifically is really useful if you're going to do any work with raster data. If you don't have Spatial Analyst, it's really limiting for doing any type of raster analysis. At WVU, we have all of these things licensed, so I can show you those, but you may not have all of these things at your organization depending on what you license and pay for. Let's see if this is done. Oh, okay, this is done. So let's see. I'm going to refresh this page. And there we go. So there's the workshop folder. And as you can see, it published out a web map, the web layer as a feature layer. If you go in here, it'll have sub layers, but really there's only one because we just had this Indiana layer. That's the Indiana counties layer there. And then it also has this service definition file. So I'm going to open up this map. And we'll do open in map view. That's fine. And then this is a web map. It should, notice it used the symbology and everything that I had already set up that in Pro, which is nice. So real quick, let's say we want to actually turn this web map into a web app. I'm going to switch this back to classic view because I'm not used to the new view yet. So let's say I want to make a web map out of this. So I'm going to do share. And let's see, that'll work. And then I want to do create a web app. And I'm just going to do a very simple one. We'll just use web app builder first. Get started. This isn't obviously a topic in here. I just wanted to show you how quickly you could go from Pro to a web map to a web app. So we'll just use the default here. Let's add this in a couple of tools. That's fine. So for the widgets here, let's add in some widgets. So we'll do a draw widget, a print widget, maybe a base map gallery or something. What else would be good? And a search widget. Okay. And I'll just call this West Virginia AGP Workshop example. And that should work. And then we'll hit save, and then we'll launch it. Okay, so now I basically have a functional web app. So, it has our pop-ups, and we could do we could print the map out. We can draw on the map. We can change the base maps. So anyway, it's a pretty simple app, but it's really easy to go from Pro to Arc Online and then to a published app. And then just to show you that, if we go back to my content and then to that specific folder, you can see now I have a new object in there, and it's the web map application or the web app. So I have an app, a map, the layers, and then the service definition. And if I want to go in and actually change this map at all, then I can download the HTML, like all the code for the page. So if I want to include it like on a server, and if I go to edit application and pull up the web app builder, I can go in and edit it more if I want. Okay, cool. So anyway, that's a quick movement stuff over to Publisher. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll, for now, since we're moving to analysis, and then we'll have about 45 minutes left. And then with that, I'm just going to discuss some analysis related topics like the toolbox and the model builder, and then a little bit of things like raster functions. All right, so I'm going to get back into it. So we have about 45 minutes left. So again, we'll just focus on some analysis related stuff for the last stretch here. Okay, so again, there's different toolboxes. What you have available just depends on your licensing. And if you think you have something licensed, but for some reason it's not working, again, you should probably go into your licensing options and just make sure it's turned on. So if you do configure your licensing options here, you can turn on your licenses and turn them off or not. So for example, if you work if you work in a group that only has like a limited number of like 3D analyst license or something, you could, turn them on and off so different people could use them at different times. So if you're having issues with licensing, I would start here and make sure things are activated and that it says it's licensed when it should be, and that it hasn't expired or anything. Okay, just a couple quick background things. So there's now an analysis tab, just like there are all the other tabs. We'll look at some examples there. It provides shortcuts to some like common tools that people use. Just like things like setting the environments, opening a model builder, opening up the Python window, looking at your processing history, stuff like that. The toolbox itself hasn't changed much. It pops up as a pane and it's pretty similar to how it looked in ArcMap. There's still a model builder and there's still Python. Note that if you're a Python user, some of the commands and methods and whatnot are a little different between ArcMap and ArcPro. The Python API is a little different, but for the most part, it's similar. You can define your environment settings, right? You can access your analysis history, like to rerun a tool or change settings or whatnot. You can make your own toolboxes and scripts. That process is a little bit different than it was before. And there's also this new thing called Raster Functions, which is for fast raster processing analysis. And I'll show you some examples of that since it's kind of completely new. Again, you have control over your environments. I generally find this is super important when you're doing raster analysis, but it's also useful for vector analysis. So for example, you can set a default working directory, Scratch workspace for saving temporary or junk files, set an output coordinate system. For raster data, you can set a snap raster for alignment, set a default cell size, set a processing mask. So that's all available. And then in Model Builder, it's actually pretty similar. If I have time, we'll play around in Model Builder a little bit. But you can still build models. You can still write out Python script versions of models. You can save graphic files. You can turn models into tools by setting parameters and whatnot. The rest of the slides here were just really related to Model Builder and some of the different components of that. So I think I'll just show you that as opposed to going through each of these processes. So let's just go back to Pro for the majority of the rest of the talk. And I just want to point out a few key things before we end. So let's see that I'm going to open up this West Virginia map because it has a ton of layers in it, so it's easy to work with. Okay, so let's say that we want to just do some simple work. So I'm going to shut off all these panes so we start from scratch. All right, so if I want to open up the toolbox, if you can either go under View, Internal, and click Geoprocessing, or you can go into Analysis and click Tools. Either way, it'll pull up the geoprocessing pane. Again, you have options to search for something. So let's search for dissolve. You can also have favorites defined. And then portal are online tools, so ready to use tools. You can also publish tools to your own ArcGIS Online account. I'll be honest, I don't do that a lot. I don't really use Arc Online for any type of geoprocessing or analysis, but you can do that. You can create tools and whatnot. So anyway, mainly the toolboxes, the options are all the kind of local tools. If you're not familiar with this, if it's got the little hammer next to it, that's basically a tool that's programmed into Arc Pro with whatever the language is, probably C or something. The ones that look like a little script, those are tools that are built in Python generally. And then there aren't a lot of these, but some of them have a little model builder icon, and those are tools that were built using model builder. If you want to use a tool, I'm just going to use Dissolve real quick. So the help has been really well integrated now. If you hover over this, it pops up kind of a general help. If you click on it, it opens up the help page. Again, the Esri help pages are generally really good. So tells you like what it's used for, what all the parameters are and suitable arguments. And then a lot of them also have the Python available. So yeah, anyway, you can, this one apparently doesn't, but if it's available, it'll have like the Python code that would be equivalent for it. You can also hover over individual things like settings and inputs, and it'll tell you what those are. So they're all pretty well integrated. Even the radio buttons have little pop-ups. Right, so this is real quick. I'm just going to dissolve this. Let's just do the county boundaries. And yeah, let's just do a flat dissolve with nothing. So no, I didn't save, I just used the default name. So it's going to save it to the default geodatabase and then whatever the default name it has. So here I just dissolved all the county boundaries. Once you've started running tools, then you can see your processing history. So if I click on history here, it'll list out all my history. I've used this project before today, so that's why there's more. But if I wanted to rerun that tool or change the settings, I could. So if I do dissolve here, I could go in here and, you know, do something else like add a statistic. So for example, I could do population and we could get the sum, right? So if I run that again, recreates that, and now inside the attribute table, I should get a total population in there where it's summed out all the counties, which is for in 2000 anyway. Okay, so anyway, the tools are again pretty similar, but there's I think some better help integration than there used to be. Let's look at just some of the like buttons up here. So again, some of the really common tools are in this tools area. If you click on this drop down, it lists a lot of those out. So that's another way to just get the common stuff, or you can always just try to find them in the toolbox. Either way, let's open up Network Analyst. So Network Analyst should be available if you have the Network Analyst extension or license. By default, it's going to use the Esri's like geolocating services. So if you want to use your own, then you'll have to go in here and change that setting to a different service. So here, basically, I'm signed into Arc Online. It's using that. But if I had an address locator or something, I could link to it here. And then, so let's just do something simple. Let's just look at some like routing. So if you click on this, it's going to generate a feature data set, which goes into the default file geodatabase, which has all the layers that you need to do that type of analysis. So let's just turn some stuff off. You don't need all this stuff. We actually really don't need anything for this example, so it's turning off. So I'm just going to zoom in here to Morgantown. And let's just get some directions. So if I go now that I have this route layer, if I click off of it, this disappears. If I click on it, then I get this route tab, and that allows you to build out your data set. So one thing I need to do is put in some stops. So to do that, I'm going to go to edit, and then we're going to do create. And that pulled up my routes there. So I want to add some stops. So I'm just going to, I don't know, I'm going to say I'm going to drive from, we'll do from Brooks Hall. I want to go to the mall up here. So these are my two stops. We'll make sure we save those. And if I go back here to route now, I have my input, so I should be able to solve the routing problem. So I can do by travel time or travel distance. We'll just leave it at time. So it'll try to find an optimized route with the shortest travel time as opposed to the shortest travel distance. We'll use the current sequence. It has to be along the network. It should work. So let's hit run. So this is again this may use some credits because I'm using Esri's like geocoding service. Okay, so there we go. So it's suggesting go down Beechhurst, turn on to the Westover Bridge, drive straight through Westover, right? That makes sense. Another thing you can do is try to add in constraints. So for example, let's say the Westover Bridge was closed for some reason. So I'm going to go into edit now again and do create again. And now I'm going to add in a line barrier. So I'm just going to draw a straight line across that. So basically the route cannot cross that line, which means you can't go over the Westover Bridge. So again, we'll save our edits there. And now if we go back into route and we run that same problem again, it's going to have to solve it without the Westover Bridge being accessible. This is probably going to have us go over to Star City and whatnot. Yep. So now instead we drive up through Evansdale and Star City, cross the bridge, get on the interstate and get off there. Just for fun, let's real quick, I'm going to go back in editing mode. I'm going to add a barrier over the Star City Bridge. So we'll see what the options are if both bridges are out. And save. Yes. And then again, we'll just rerun this routing problem and see what it comes up with. Probably going to have us go down here, get on the interstate. Yeah, there we go. So go down here, get on the interstate, get off the interstate there on Westover. Cool. Okay, so anyway, that's just an example of a routing problem with the network analyst. I'm going to take a few minutes now and talk about raster functions. So this is, as far as I know, completely new in Pro. It actually wasn't even available in the early versions of Pro. So, if you work with large raster data sets like images or, elevation models, it can be really time consuming and take a long time to process and generate large files. So one workaround that Esri's come up with for that issue is raster functions. And effectively what this does is instead of running a tool for the entire data set and saving their output on your local disk, it actually just creates virtual rasters that are stored like in memory that are only updated as needed. So if you zoom into a little area, it can just run the tool in that area. And if you zoom over to another area, then it reprocesses it and runs it in that area. One thing that's really cool about raster functions is that even though they are virtual and they're different kind of from other raster layers, you can still use them as input to other tools. So it's not just its own environment. One of the kind of complexities of this is if you're working in an Arc environment, then it's fine, but these layers are virtual, so they're not going to be available if you want to move into another environment, like use a remote sensing software package or R or like working code or something. So at that point, you would need to export it out, and it's going to take some time to do that. But if you just want to use it virtually to do analyses in Arc, then this is a suitable use that might actually like speed up your analysis a good bit. So I'm going to click on these raster functions here. And that opens up the pane, and you can see there's a bunch of built-in tools, and you can also build your own. The function editor it's kind of like Model Builder. It allows you to sequence a bunch of steps and do something. Okay, so I'm going to open up another map. I'm going to go to Catalog, and I'm going to open up this, let's see, Landsat 8 map. Okay, so I'm going to zoom over to these layers here. Okay, so these are two Landsat 8 images. One of them was before a fire and the other one was after. So this is the before fire. This area here, it's in the St. Angeles National Forest. It's just east of Los Angeles. So this is before a fire and this is after a fire. So there's this fairly large fire scar here. This is the sand fire. I can't remember when it happened. I think it was like 2016, I want to say. So let's say we wanted to do an analysis to get like a burn index. And I believe this exists in here. If not, so this is NBR. I guess we have to do band arithmetic. That'll work. Okay, so what we want to do here is calculate NDBR. Actually, Oh, and we have to give it the columns. So shortwave should be, I guess it would be 7 and 5, I think, are the right bands. So this is a index that's used to try to map or differentiate different to burn areas from like vegetated areas. So we want to grab, first we'll do our pre-fire. There we go. So that's the burn index pre-fire. And then we'll run that again, but this time we're going to do it on the post-fire. Post-fire. And the same thing, we want to do 7 and 5. So you can see here that shows up pretty bright. So that's the area that burn. And then if we wanted to, we could get a difference of those. So I'm going to go into geoprocessing. Oh, right, sorry. I'm going to do raster functions again. And we want to do a subtraction. So we'll do, I'm assuming math. No, math. There we go. And then minus. So we're going to take the post-fire and then subtract from that the pre-fire. And we'll do create new. And then we get back this burn index. So the bright areas are where there is a change in the index, which indicates fire. So here's that kind of fire scar for this sand fire here. And then we have this couple other smaller fires down there. So you see how fast that was? I mean, it basically ran it like quickly. I mean, granted, this is not a giant data set, but it could do this if you had a very large data set, because it's effectively just doing the portion that it needs in memory for you. I have some other examples with this. Let's look at, let's see, we're going to pull this one. So this is a fairly high resolution layer. So this is a fairly high resolution DEM of the area around like Seneca Rocks. So Seneca Rocks is like here, and this is Germany Valley. I guess this is the South Branch there. So let's say we wanted to create some terrain derivatives from this DEM. Okay, so underneath the raster functions here, there's a surface tools, and a lot of those are your terrain surface. So let's first do a shaded relief. So we're going to input this DEM layer. We're going to use color ramp. That's probably excessive. Let's see here. Let's do this color ramp. We'll do a multi-directional hill shade, maybe. Change this to multi-directional, and that should do it. And let's hit create new layer. And that basically just created a shaded relief hill shade, like almost instantaneously. Again, no files are being saved to disk or anything. This is just like virtual. Yeah. So anyway, that's an example of that. Let me just do another one real quick. We'll do slope aspect surface. So again, we'll just give it a DEM here. And there's a combined slope aspect surface. Okay, so this, as you can see here, there are layers that there are a bunch of built-in tools, and there aren't as many tools in here as there are in, say, like the Spatial Analyst Toolbox or the Image Analyst Toolbox, but they are adding things. There are some tools that are only available as raster functions. So for example, there's some correction for like working with like radar data. I don't think there are equivalent tools for that. Yeah. Okay, so anyway, that's that. Let's go at it. So let's say, for example, I wanted to save this to a permanent file. Then to do that, I would just have to click on it and do data export raster, and then it would export it out. You can also add it to a mosaic data set, but that will take some time because then it actually has to produce it and save it to disk. Let's see here. That's pretty much it. Let's look at under imagery. So I'm going to go back to this Landsat 8. So if you have the image analyst extension, there are also options for there should have this image tab. And there's some tools in here for working with image data specifically. So for example, let me click on this Sandfire post. We could create, like, for example, an NDVI. So let me just grab that. It'll ask you which bands are which. So this is, we want to do the near infrared and the red. And that'll produce an NDVI. Note that this is not a raster function, so it's actually like saving that out to disk. So this is actually a layer that got written to disk. You see it's like a TIFF file there. So that's that. Let's see what's the other, and then you can access the raster functions in there also. One thing I didn't talk about earlier that's probably worth mentioning real quick is data, symbolizing raster data. So let me click on one of these multi-band rasters. Let's click on this post. So let's say we want to change like the band combinations. So most layers, when you click on them, they'll have an appearance tab. You click on appearance. And for a multi-band raster, like an image, you generally are going to have band combination options. So I could go in here and change this to like a standard false color. So it'd be 5, which is near infrared, 4, which is red, and then green, which is 3. And that creates your kind of standard false color view. If we wanted to do a regular like true color composite, it'd be 4, 3, 2. And then you can actually save those. That it just says custom there. But if I wanted to do like, we'll just do, we'll call it short AVIR underscore here underscore green, which was the original symbology I had. So that would be 7, 5, 3. And now if I wanted to use that, it actually shows up with a name, and you could apply that to a different layer. So for example, I could switch this one and just apply it. Some other useful things are things like contrast stretches. So you can apply different contrast stretches. The default in Esri is it uses a % clip. So it clips off the high and low values and either desaturates them or saturates them completely and does a linear stretch over the remaining values. DAR can be useful. That's dynamic range adjustment. And what that allows you to do is to stretch the color values just over the current visible extent. So it should like auto adjust. Oh, I'm the wrong one here. No, I think it's having a hard time adjusting that. But anyway, that DAR, what that does is allows you to, oh, I see. I've moved it underneath of the typical map. That's why. There we go. So this auto adjusts the color ramps to just use the values within the current window. So I can help with like contrast issues and stuff. You can kind of see how the tones change as we move around because it's auto adjusting it. Okay. All right, so we've got about 20 minutes left. So I thought to end, I would just show you a little bit of raster or model builder related stuff. And that should be the last topic. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of all these layers and go into this wetlands map, I believe. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I'm going to build a quick model here. So here's a portion of the proposed route for corridor H, which isn't complete yet. So anyway, what we want to do is create a model that will summarize the total of impacted wetlands around this road based on a certain distance threshold. So to do that, we're going to use a model since there's multiple steps. So I'm going to go into analysis here, and now we want to open up model builder, and that's going to open up as like a tab. And then you get a new model builder tab. So here's all that. And we can start, building out our model. Okay, so to do this, we're going to pull in our layers first. So we have this proposed highway route. Then we have our wetlands. And those are the only 2 inputs. And then we want to start inputting tools. So first thing I'm going to have to do is buffer out the roads. So click on that. And then for the wetlands, I only want to look at palustrine wetlands. So we're going to do a select. And then we want to clip out our selection relative to the buffer. So we're going to need to do a clip. An intersect would work too, but we'll just do clip. And then we're going to do a add field because we're going to want to calculate the area. And then we'll do a calculate geometry. And then I guess we'd want to do a summarize. Summarize attribute, I think is what we would need. Okay, so there's all of our inputs and tools. So now you want to hook everything up. So start off with this. So for the buffer, we're going to buffer out the county's data. So note that these are coming from the contents pane and these are coming from the model. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the one that I pulled into the model. Then we have to set a buffer distance. We'll just do 2 kilometers. 2 kilometers. And that should work. So that should be good. So now we have that process. And then for select here, we're going to grab the wetlands and we want to add an expression. So we want to do wetland type is equal to, okay, so there actually are multiple palustrine types. So instead of doing is equal to, I'm going to do begins with, and we're going to say begins with P. So what that should select all the ones that begin with P. So this should be our output palustrine wetlands. And then we're going to take our output wetlands and we're going to clip it with our buffer that we made. Okay, and then we're going to add a field to that output. So actually, I'm going to change the names of these so that they're more understandable. So we'll call this road buffer. And then we'll call this P wetlands. And then this will be wetlands impacted. Okay. All right, so now we want to add a field to this wetlands impacted. We're going to call it, I was going to call it hec for hectares. And we'll make it a double. And we don't really need anything else. And then in that field, we'll do, so we want our wetlands impacted to field existing or new. I guess we could have just used an existing field. So we'll do hec, and we're going to put in there the area in hectares. And we'll just use the current map. And then 3. And then we're going to call this, we'll just call this summary table. And we're going to do and sum. Okay, so one thing to make things look cleaner when you're doing models, you can click this auto layout and it'll try to make a nice clean layout out of it. Sometimes I like what it does, sometimes I don't. You can also set environment settings under Model Builder. When you do it under Model Builder, those environment settings are only honored in the model as opposed to the entire map project. Okay, and then it might work. So let's see what happens. So I'm going to do a validate, see if we have any issues. So we didn't find any issues, but that doesn't mean it's going to work perfectly. It just means it didn't find any like logical errors or syntax errors or something. Okay, so let's hit run and see if it runs. So here it's going through, obviously running all the tools. Okay, so that's done. So now let's see if it did what we thought. So I'm going to add first this output to the map. Okay, so actually let's just add everything so we can kind of see it. Add. Okay, so now if we go back here, this was our 2-kilometer buffer around the road. It looks like, yeah, all the extracted features there is in that buffer. If we open it up, we should see that all the types should just be the Palustrin types, because that's what is our selection. So that looks like that worked. And if we look at the attribute table, we should see the hectares calculated there. And I'll be honest, I wasn't completely sure about the calculation, if that worked correctly. So let's see if it did. So let me add this to the display. Okay, so let's see if this actually did what we thought. Okay, there we go. And then that should have summed up the area. So a total of 619 hectares of wetlands were within that buffer, right? Okay, so one thing that's really cool with tools is that you can turn them into, or models, is you can actually turn them into tools so people can run them like any other tool in Arc, and they don't actually have to interact with the model. Before we do that, I just want to note you can do some exports of this. So for example, let me just save this real quick. Oh, that's not it. Let's see. Model builder. Share. No, I guess not. I'm not finding this, but somewhere you can export out. Oh, here we go. Export. So you can export it out as a graphic. It'll just save a graphic file of your model. Let me just let me see, find some place where I can find it. I'm just gonna do. So let's call that. So this just exported out an SVG file of the model that you could play with or edit or whatnot, or use in a report. And you can also export out a Python version or Python script of the file. Again, we'll do the same thing. I'm just gonna dump it on my desktop. And I'm just opening it's on my other screen here. I'm just opening it up so you can see it. So here's that Python file. So the model is a Python script. These things tend to be pretty messy, but I find they can be a good starting point if you're trying to build out a script just to see how things are working in the model. The first few builds of Arc Pro, they got rid of that, even though it worked in ArcMap. And I read some blogs about it, and apparently the reason was they felt that the code it generated wasn't very good. So they added it back in. I'm not sure if they did that because they improved it, or if because people complained and they wanted and they just added it back in. But you couldn't do that in earlier versions, but they have added that back in now. Okay, so we have like 10 minutes left, and the last thing I wanted to discuss was, again, turning this into a model or a tool. So first thing I'm going to do is go over to the catalog, and we're going to go into the project here and then to toolboxes. As you can see, it has a default toolbox which you could save the model into, or sorry, well, yeah, you see the model should have been saved into, and there it is. So I'm just, for the heck of it, I'm just going to do add toolbox here and make a new toolbox. Let's see here. I'm just going to save it out here in the open. I'll just call this example PV box. Oh, oops, I guess that was add, not create. New toolbox. So yeah, we'll do it here, second toolbox, call it that. So that created another toolbox. So now if I wanted to save this model, I could do a save as. And again, they have to be saved in a toolbox. So go to toolboxes, second toolbox, and we'll call this wetland model save. Okay, now to turn this into a tool, we need to do a couple of things. We need to set user-defined parameters. So we're going to want the user to be able to input the input road, the input wetlands. It'd be good if they could set their own buffer distance. So we're going to do a create variable here from parameter, and we want to do distance. And then we want to set that as a parameter. Then we're going to have them, we want them to be able to name all the outputs. So we're just going to set those as, well, actually, we don't want that. That's the same thing. And then we want to hit that as a parameter. Another useful thing is to change the names so they're a little bit more interpretable. So I'm going to rename this to just simply input road. We'll call this one input wetlands. Rename, we'll call this, I don't know, impact distance. And then rename, we'll call this wetlands impacted. I guess it impacted. And then lastly, we'll rename this to total wetland area. So let's save that. Okay, so this is one thing that's different between ArcMap and ArcPro. So remember, if you had a custom toolbox that you got from someone else or that you made, the way that you would have added that in to use it would be to do something like this. So you'd have the toolbox, and at the top of the directory, there'd be like Arc Tools, and you click on it, and you could do an import toolbox. Well, that's not how it works in here. Instead, the way you access tools from a different toolbox that's not part of the base toolboxes is you have to go to the catalog. You have to go to that toolbox, and if you don't have it, then you'll have to do an add toolbox. So for example, let me see if I had any. So here I have Tau DEM tools, so that I could add that, and then I have access to all the Tau DEM tools. So we want to access the tool that we just made. So we'll go to second toolbox here. And then there's our wetland model. And if we wanted to edit it, we could just click edit and it would open it. And you could use it like a model. What we want to do is run it like a tool. So if I double click on it, it opens it up over here and you can see it looks like a tool now, right? So we have our user defined parameters that we can set. We have our names that we used. So let's just rerun this tool with different distance. So we're going to use, let's see, we want to use our counties, and again, our wetlands. We'll change this now to, let's just do 4 kilometers. And I'm going to put a 2 on the end of these. Okay, and then if we run it, we should just rerun the tool now with, or the model now as a tool, but with a different buffer distance. Okay, so let's, I don't know if it added it by default, let's see. Oh, it did. So now we have our summary table 2. So let's open that up. And now we have a bigger distance, so 1,123 hectares versus, or not distance, area, versus 619 hectares. And then if you wanted to share that with somebody, then you basically could send them the toolbox that you made. So I would just send this toolbox, and you should also be able to like compress that down into like a geoprocessing tool or something. Okay, so that's pretty much everything I had. Again, just to finish up, I wanted to note that if you want to some other resources to try to learn or get more practice playing with ArcGIS Pro. Again, with West Virginia View, we have some materials. The course that makes the most sense is Intro to GIS Science. That's all the labs are in Arc Pro. Some of the digital cartography stuff's in Arc Pro too. The client-side WebJS course, there's some publishing from into Arc Pro. And then these courses are all in other environments. So it's mainly, it's probably the GIS science course and the web, and maybe a little bit of the cartography that has some more pro stuff in it, but mainly the GIS science course. And again, if you're looking for other resources, the Esri has several books that are related to Arc Pro. Some are more like lab manuals, and some are more like traditional books. And obviously the help is great. The way I learned more than anything was to just play around with it. I found that after first few days it was kind of annoying because I didn't know where things were. Within a few weeks, I felt like I kind of knew what I was doing and how to find stuff. And again, just like ArcMap, the user base is fairly large. So if you go on in like GeoNet or Stack Exchange or whatever like sites that you use, you generally can find a lot of help because there's a lot of people working in this environment. Okay, so I'm done. So I'll hang on for a few minutes if anyone wants to ask any questions in the chat or or verbally. Again, if you have any other questions or comments later on, feel free to email or contact me. But I hope you found this useful. Again, hopefully it's kind of a crash course. I just want to show you a lot of things to get you jump started. That's the main idea.
Yeah, we've got just a couple of minutes left. Like Aaron said, if anyone has any questions at all, feel free to ask. I will go ahead and let you guys know there is a free hour after this for lunch, so everyone has a break. At 1 o'clock are the exhibitor sessions where you can hang out and jam with our sponsors. And then at 2:15 is the roundtable. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Aaron.
Yeah, you're welcome. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.
All right. I'll see you guys in a little bit. Bye.